When I invited my family to my national award ceremony, my dad laughed. Not out loud, he typed it. Just a lowly teacher. My sister said they had dinner plans. My mom liked his message. And that was the moment I realized something painful. The people who raised me didn't think my life mattered. But a few hours later, my face appeared on national television. And somewhere across town, while they were eating dessert, my father froze at his phone and said, "That J.O.? What is this?" I didn't know that 5 words could follow me for years. But they did. Just a lowly teacher. That's what my father typed. And somehow, it hurt more than if he had shouted it. I'm 31 years old. I've been teaching in a public school for 10 years. And until recently, I didn't realize how much of my life I had spent trying to prove that my job mattered. Not to strangers. Not to society. To my own family. It started on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers that needed grading. The sun was coming through the window just enough to warm the floor. It was an ordinary day. Ordinary until my inbox refreshed. There it was, an email from the National Education Board. I almost ignored it. I thought it was another newsletter, another reminder about funding cuts or curriculum updates. But the subject line made me pause. Congratulations. My heart beat once. Hard. I clicked. And I read it. Then, I read it again. And again. You have been selected as this year's National Educator of Impact. National. Too big for the stacks of budget notebooks I bought with my own money. Too big for someone who was used to hearing, "So what's your real plan?" I sat back in my chair and just stared at the wall. 10 years. 10 years of arriving early and leaving late. 10 years of grading papers at midnight. 10 years of skipping lunch to help students who pretended they didn't need help. 10 years of staying calm when parents yelled. 10 years of being told that teachers have easy hours and long vacations. And someone saw it. Someone important enough to put it in writing. The ceremony would be held Friday night. There would be press, cameras, a short feature segment broadcast nationally. I felt something rise in my chest. Not pride, relief, like maybe I hadn't been crazy for believing this work mattered. And then I did what daughters do when something big happens. I opened the family group chat, Dad, Mom, my sister Alina, because even at 31, I still wanted it. Their approval, their excitement. Their "we're proud of you." So I typed carefully, "Hey, I have some news. I've been selected for a National Teaching Award this Friday. There's a ceremony, and it'll be covered on TV. I'd really love if you could come." I reread it 3 times before pressing send. The message delivered. And then I waited. You ever notice how silence feels louder when you're hoping for something? The 3 dots appeared. My heart jumped. Dad replied, "First, national? For what exactly?" There it was. The tone I knew so well. Not excitement. Evaluation. For classroom innovation. I typed back, "They're highlighting student impact." 3 dots again. Longer this time. Then the message came through. Just a lowly teacher. I didn't breathe. I read it once. Twice. 5 times. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe he was joking. But there was no smiley face. No lull. No softening. Just a lowly teacher. Before I could even process it, Alina replied, "We're busy Friday. Dinner plans." Dinner plans. And then my mom. She didn't write anything. She just liked Dad's message. A tiny blue thumbs up. It looked so small on the screen. But it felt enormous. Agreement. Validation. Confirmation. I stared at my phone so long the screen dimmed. And I forced a smile. "That's fine," I said out loud to my empty kitchen. But it wasn't fine, because this wasn't the first time. At 13, when relatives asked what I wanted to be, Dad would laugh and say, "She wants to be a teacher. We'll see." At 19, when I chose my major, he asked if I was sure I didn't want something more ambitious. At 25, when Alina got promoted at her corporate job, Dad toasted to real success. And when someone asked about me, She teaches. That was it. No details. No praise. Just a quiet dismissal wrapped in polite tone, and the jokes. Oh, must be nice to have summers off. Easy job, right? You'll never afford a real house on that salary. I used to laugh along, because correcting them felt embarrassing, because defending teaching felt desperate, because part of me wondered, maybe they were right. Maybe I could have done more, but they didn't see what I saw. They didn't see Luis, who used to sit in the back row with his hoodie, up until I stayed after school for 3 weeks helping him catch up. They didn't see Amira crying because she thought her accent made her stupid. They didn't see the quiet thank you notes, the drawings, the letters. You're the first teacher who believed in me. Those things don't trend on social media. They don't impress at dinner parties, but they matter. So why did their words still land like they were true? I locked my phone and placed it face down. For a moment, I almost deleted the invitation. Almost told myself maybe I shouldn't have expected anything different. Almost convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. But then something inside me asked a simple question. If one of my students told me their family laughed at their dream, what would I tell them to thirding? I wouldn't tell them to shrink. I wouldn't tell them to stay quiet. So why was I doing that to myself? I stood up, grabbed my coat, and drove to the auditorium for rehearsal. The building smelled like fresh paint and nerves. The stage lights were on, casting a warm glow over empty seats. It was quiet. Important. My principal saw me and walked over quickly, smiling. "Kay," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "The district is so proud. This is national coverage. Media. They're filming a feature about your classroom innovation. It's going to air the same night." National coverage. I nodded politely, but in the back of my mind, I heard my father's voice again. Just a lowly teacher. I walked across the stage during rehearsal. Each step echoed slightly. I imagined Friday night, the announcer reading my name, the applause, the cameras, and I pictured 3 empty chairs where my family could have been. A tightness formed in my chest. Familiar, old, the same feeling I had at 13, at 19, at 25, the feeling of being measured and found, small. On the drive home, I replayed the messages again. Just a lowly teacher. We're busy Friday. Thumbs up. And something shifted. For the first time, instead of shrinking, I felt clarity. Why did their recognition still feel like oxygen? Why was I still trying to win a race they didn't even believe I was? Running dodged. That night, I cooked pasta for one. I ironed my blazer slowly. I laid my speech on the kitchen table. Not because I expected applause from my family, but because my students deserve to hear their story, told right. Before bed, I opened the group chat again. No new messages. They were probably at dinner already. Laughing, celebrating something that sounded more impressive. And I imagined something quietly. The same phones they used to dismiss me would soon show something else entirely. I set my alarm, but I didn't sleep deeply. I dreamed of chalk dust floating in bright camera lights, of my father staring at a screen, of my name spoken slowly, clearly, and just before dawn, my phone buzzed. A message from a colleague. "You ready to make history?" I stared at those words, and for the first time since Tuesday afternoon, I smiled without forcing it. "Yes," I whispered to the empty room. "I am." Because what I didn't know yet was that by the end of that night, the man who laughed at my invitation would be staring at his phone, frozen, and asking a very different question. What is this? And this time, he wouldn't be the one deciding what mattered. The morning of the ceremony didn't feel real. It felt suspended, like the air itself was waiting. I woke before my alarm, staring at the ceiling in the pale blue light of dawn. For a few seconds, I forgot what day it was, and then it came rushing back. Friday. National. Award. I reached for my phone without thinking. No new messages in the family group chat. Not even a good luck. For a moment, the old disappointment tried to creep in. That quiet voice that whispers, "See, it never mattered to them." But this time, something inside me answered back. "It matters to you. And that was enough. I got up slowly and made coffee. The smell filled the apartment, grounding me. I moved carefully through the morning like it was something fragile. I didn't want to rush it. I didn't want to ruin it by checking my phone too often. By 8 a.m., messages from colleagues started pouring in. So proud of you. You deserve this. I had built a family without noticing. It just didn't share my last name. School passed in a blur. My students buzzed with excitement because someone had told them cameras would be there. They kept asking if I was nervous. A little, I admitted, but it wasn't the stage that made me nervous. It was the empty seats I already knew I'd see. By late afternoon, I went home to get ready. I stood in front of my closet longer than necessary. It felt strange to pick an outfit for something that big. I chose my navy blazer, the one I wore during parent conferences when I needed to feel steady. I straightened my hair. Simple. Clean. Wedded. No drama. Teaching had never been about flash. As I was putting on my earrings, my phone buzzed. For one foolish second, my heart jumped. Maybe they changed their minds. Maybe Dad thought about it and realized how it sounded. Maybe Mom decided to call. But it was just a reminder notification. Dinner reservation confirmed. 7 p.m. I stared at it. Right? They weren't busy by accident. They had chosen dinner. At 6:15 p.m., I drove to the auditorium. The sky was turning orange, the kind of sunset that makes everything look cinematic. I wondered briefly if they were driving to their restaurant at that exact moment. Did they think about me at all? Inside, the energy was different than rehearsal. Lights were brighter. The seats were filling. Camera crews moved quietly, adjusting equipment. I caught my reflection in one of the lobby mirrors. For a split second, I saw myself the way I imagined they saw me. Small. Ordinary. Just a teacher. Then my principal walked up beside me again. Ready? He asked, smiling. I nodded, and we walked inside. The ceremony moved quickly at first. Applause rose and fell in waves as names were called. Each educator had fought their own quiet battles. And then, Kaya Williams. The sound of my name echoed through the hall. It felt unreal. My heart pounded so loudly I almost couldn't hear the rest. They read the citation, recognized nationally for classroom innovation, measurable student growth, and transformative community impact. Transformative. Community impact. I walked to the stage slowly. The lights were warm against my skin. Applause surrounded me. For a moment, I let myself feel it fully, not because it proved something to my family, but because it honored the work. I looked out at the crowd, and yes, there were empty seats, but they weren't louder than the applause. When they handed me the award, it felt heavier than I expected. Solid. Real. The host leaned toward me. Would you like to say a few words? My speech was folded neatly in my pocket, but when I stepped up to the microphone, I didn't read it. Instead, I spoke plainly. I teach because someone once stayed after school for me, I began, and it changed my life. So I decided to be that person for someone else. The room quieted. I talked about Luis, about Amira, about dignity, about how teaching isn't small, it's foundational. I didn't mention my family, but somewhere inside, I knew those 5 words had shaped this moment. Just a lowly teacher. When I finished, the applause felt different. Longer. Deeper. Not loud for the sake of noise, but steady. As I stepped off stage, I made one decision. I wouldn't check my phone. Not yet. I didn't want to measure this moment by their reaction. I wanted to let it exist without permission. The ceremony ended around 9 p.m. There were photos. Handshakes. Interviews. A reporter asked how it felt to receive national recognition. It feels, I said slowly, like quiet work finally being heard. By the time I drove home, it was almost 10:30. The apartment was dark and calm. I kicked off my heels and sat on the couch, still holding the award. And then my phone buzzed. A message from my friend Maya. Turn on the TV. I frowned. What? Just do it. I reached for the remote. The local news intro music filled the room, and then, there's inspiring news tonight. A local educator is receiving national attention for innovative teaching methods. My breath caught. The screen cut to footage from earlier. My classroom. My students laughing. Me explaining a project. And then, my face. Close up. Clear. The banner beneath read, National Educator of Impact. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just watched. And somewhere across town, in a softly lit restaurant, my father's phone lit up because someone had sent him the clip. Maybe a colleague, maybe a neighbor, the kind of people whose opinions he respected. I could almost picture it, the clinking of glasses, the low hum of conversation, Dad scrolling casually, and then freezing. "What is this?" he would say. Not laughing, not dismissing. Confused because the screen showed something that didn't match the story he'd told himself. The news anchor said my name slowly. Clearly, this educator's work is now being recognized across the country. Across the country. Not just, not lowly. National. I imagined my sister leaning over his shoulder, recognition hitting her like cold water. Recognition hitting her like cold water. I imagined my mother going quiet. That tiny blue thumbs up suddenly very far away. Back in my apartment, my phone began to buzz. Once, twice, 3 times. Calls, notifications, missed calls stacking up. Dad, Alina. I stared at the screen. It would have been easy to answer, to rush toward the validation, to soak it in. But something inside me held still. I remembered the group chat, the laughter, the dinner plans, the thumbs up. And I realized something important. They didn't believe in the work, they believed in the spotlight. And those are not the same thing. So I let it ring, not out of spite, out of clarity. I let the news segment finish. I let the anchor call me an inspiration. I let the screen fade to the next story. Only then did I turn off the TV. The room went quiet again. My phone buzzed once more. I flipped it over. 12 missed calls. 7 new messages. Dad, call me. Alina, why didn't you say it was this big? Mom, we're so proud of you. So proud. At those words, and I felt calm. Not angry, not vindicated. Just calm. Because for the first time, their recognition didn't feel like oxygen. It felt optional. I placed my phone face down again. Set the award gently on the coffee table, and went to bed, not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally understood something. The moment didn't belong to them, it belonged to me. And the next morning, when I would finally answer, the conversation wouldn't sound the same. The conversation wouldn't sound the same. Because this time, I wasn't asking to be seen. I already was. The next morning, my phone felt heavier than usual. Not physically, emotionally. It was still face down on my nightstand where I had left it. For a few quiet seconds, I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the stillness of my apartment. No applause, no anchor voice, no buzzing notifications, just me. And for once, I didn't wake up feeling small. I reached for my phone slowly. 32 notifications. Missed calls from Dad, from Mom, from Alina. Even from an uncle who hadn't spoken to me in months. The group chat had exploded overnight. Dad, why didn't you tell us it was going to be on national TV? Alina, this is huge. Why didn't you explain properly? Mom, we are so proud. Call us when you wake up. Not one of them mentioned what had been said before. Not one of them wrote the words. Just a lowly teacher. Not one apology. Just confusion. Just urgency. Just pride. Suddenly fluent and loud. I sat up in bed and let the silence stretch. This was the moment I used to imagine. The moment when they would finally see me. The moment when Dad would call his friends and say my name with weight. The moment when Alina would stop smirking about corporate bonuses. And yet, it didn't feel the way I thought it would. It didn't feel like oxygen. It felt optional. My phone started ringing again. Dad, I watched it ring. 3 times. Then it stopped and rang again. I answered on the 4th call. Hello? There was a brief pause on the other end. His voice, when it came through, sounded different. Careful. K. He said my name slowly, like he was testing it. I saw you on TV. I know, I replied calmly. That was something. I could hear background noise. Maybe he was pacing. Maybe Mom was nearby. Maybe Alina was listening. We didn't realize, he continued. You made it sound small. I almost smiled. I made it sound small. I told you it was a national award, I said gently. Another pause. Well, yes, but you know how these things are. Sometimes they exaggerate. I let that word sit between us. You saw it, I said. It wasn't exaggerated. No, he admitted quietly. It wasn't. And then the sentence came. I'm proud of you. There it was. The sentence I had waited years to hear. I closed my eyes because I remembered every time it had been missing. At 13, at 19, at 25. And now, at 31. And instead of rushing to accept it, I did something different. Dad, I said evenly, when I invited you to the ceremony, you laughed. Silence. I could almost hear him trying to rearrange the memory. You know how I am. No, I replied softly. It wasn't a joke. The air shifted. Dad, you typed. Just a lowly teacher. The words felt heavier spoken out loud. He exhaled sharply. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? Another silence. I didn't think it was this big. There it was. The truth, not cruel, just clear. He didn't think it mattered. Until someone he respected confirmed it. I've been teaching for 10 years, I said quietly. It mattered then too. He didn't answer immediately. Because there wasn't an easy way to argue with that. Mom's voice floated faintly in the background. What is she saying? Dad covered the phone slightly, then came back. We just didn't understand, he said. You didn't try to, I replied. That landed. Because it wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was steady. I invited you, I continued. You chose dinner. It was already planned. So was my career, I said. That silence again. He wasn't used to me pushing back. For years I had smiled, changed the subject. Let the jokes slide, because I didn't want to seem sensitive. But sensitivity isn't weakness, it's awareness. And I was finally aware. I'm sorry if it hurt you, he said finally. If. That small word. I noticed it. I'm not calling to fight, I said calmly. I just needed you to know it mattered. Long before cameras, long before the news. He exhaled slowly. I didn't think it mattered, he admitted. And for a second, that honesty almost softened me. Because it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't evil. It was ordinary. He had simply valued certain kinds of success more than others. And I had spent years trying to climb a ladder he respected. Instead of standing firm on the ground I chose. I don't need you to understand everything about my job, I said gently. But I do need you to respect it. Another long pause. I do, he said, more quietly this time. I do now. Now, that word didn't sting the way it would have before, because I didn't need now. I already had, always. Okay, I said. He cleared his throat. Your mother wants to talk. Mom came on the line. Her voice was softer. We are so proud, Ka. I appreciate that, I replied. We always supported you. I didn't argue. But we both knew that wasn't fully true. You liked the message, I said calmly. Silence. I didn't think. I know, I interrupted gently. That's the point. She inhaled sharply, and for the first time I heard something real in her voice. Regret. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Not defensive, not explaining. Just sorry. That mattered. More than pride. More than excitement. Because apology requires reflection, we talked for a few more minutes. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive. But something had shifted, not in them. In me. When the call ended, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lighter, like I had finally put down a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. Because later that evening, Alina texted me privately. Can we talk? We met at a small cafe halfway between our apartments. She arrived 10 minutes late, like always. But this time, she didn't lead with a joke. She looked at me carefully. You didn't tell us it was that serious, she said. I did. She frowned slightly. I mean, you know how Dad is. There it was again. The excuse that had protected him for years. I'm not mad, I said calmly. I'm just done shrinking. She looked down at her coffee. I didn't mean it when I said we were busy. But you were. She didn't argue, because she had been. Do you know what it feels like, I continued gently, to work for something for 10 years and still be the least impressive person at the table? Her jaw tightened slightly. You think it's easy for me? She asked quietly. Being compared all the time, that surprised me. I didn't know you felt that way. She gave a small, humorless laugh. Dad doesn't just compare you. He compares me too. Promotions, bonuses, titles. It's never enough. We sat in silence for a moment. Because suddenly, it wasn't about teaching. It was about approval. About chasing it. About measuring ourselves against expectations that kept moving. I was jealous, she admitted finally. Of what? That you actually like what you do. That landed differently. Calling me just a teacher had been easier than admitting that. Maybe I had chosen something meaningful, and she had chosen something impressive. There's a difference. And she felt it. I'm sorry, she said. And this time, it didn't feel forced. It felt human. We didn't hug dramatically. We didn't cry. But something honest had entered the space. And honesty changes everything. When I drove home that night, I realized something powerful. The award had shifted their tone, but the confrontation had shifted me, because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's clarity, sometimes it's refusing to accept rewritten history, sometimes it's simply saying the words they hoped you'd forget. Just a lowly teacher. He said it. They agreed. And now they knew I hadn't forgotten. And strangely, I didn't feel the need to punish them, because the real shift had already happened. They saw me now, but more importantly, I saw myself. And that changed the balance forever. Success changes the room. Not the furniture, not the walls. The energy, the tone. The way people say your name. The week after the broadcast felt like living inside an echo. Everywhere I went, someone had seen it. At school, parents who had barely made eye contact before were suddenly shaking my hand twice. Students looked at me like I had unlocked some secret level in a game. Colleagues forwarded articles with subject lines like, "You're famous now." But the strangest change didn't happen at school. It happened in my family. The group chat, once quiet and casual, became active. Too active. Dad started sending links. Articles about the segment, screenshots of social media posts. Look at this comment. They're saying great things. My friend Mark saw it. The same Mark who once asked me at a barbecue if I had a backup career. Now Dad was proud that Mark saw me on TV. Mom began forwarding my interviews to distant relatives. Alina posted a picture of us from years ago with the caption, "So proud of my sister." Always knew she'd do big things. Always knew. I stared at that line for a long time. Memory is funny. It edits itself when needed. I didn't respond in the chat immediately. Not because I was angry, but because I was observing. This wasn't apology. This was alignment. They were adjusting their position now that the world had spoken. And I understood something important. There's a difference between support and association. Support is quiet and consistent. Association appears when cameras do. 3 days later, Dad called again. His tone was lighter this time. Your mother and I were thinking, he said. We should have a dinner. Celebrate properly. Celebrate properly. The words were careful, measured, strategic. What kind of dinner? I asked. Oh, something nice. Invite the relatives. Maybe your uncle's family. Make it a big thing. A big thing. I imagined it. A long table, Dad raising a glass, telling a story differently this time. My daughter, the national educator. The same daughter who was just a lowly teacher 5 days ago. When were you thinking? I asked. This Saturday. Saturday. I checked my calendar. There it was. A speaking invitation. A local youth education panel. Something I would have canceled in the past to attend family dinner. But not this time. I have something scheduled, I said calmly. There was a pause. You can reschedule, Dad replied quickly. It's important. So is family. The old argument. But this time, it didn't shake me. Family was important last Friday, too, I said gently. Silence, the kind that feels like someone realizing the script has changed. We didn't understand then, he replied. I understand now, I said. He didn't like that. Because I wasn't arguing. I wasn't attacking. I was steady. You're choosing strangers over us, he asked. I almost smiled. I'm choosing commitments, I replied. That landed differently. Because it wasn't emotional. It was factual. I'll come to dinner another time, I added. But I won't rearrange my life to prove something. There it was. The boundary. Soft. Clear. He exhaled slowly. You've changed, he said. Yes, I replied. And that was the first honest thing in the conversation. I had changed. Not because of the award, because of clarity. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. That Saturday, while my family gathered without me, I stood in front of a room full of teenagers talking about purpose. One boy raised his hand and asked, "What if the people close to you don't believe in your dream?" The room got quiet. I didn't rush my answer. You believe in it, I said finally, long enough for them to catch up. And for the first time, I wasn't speaking from theory. I was speaking from experience. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. Pictures from dinner. Alina tagging me in a story. Celebrating our star. Our star? Ownership sounds different when it's convenient. But something unexpected happened over the next few weeks. The pride continued, but so did the invitations, interviews, a podcast appearance. And suddenly, my time mattered, not just professionally. Personally. When Mom called to ask if I could help her with something small, I didn't drop everything. When Dad suggested another dinner, I said, let me check my schedule. And I meant it, because for years I had made myself available. Emotionally. Physically. Trying to earn something that should have been freely given. Respect. One evening, Alina came over unexpectedly. She stood in my doorway holding a bottle of wine. Peace offering, she said softly. We sat on the couch where I had watched the broadcast. The room felt different now, not because of fame. Because of balance, she looked around. You have always liked simple spaces, she said. I like quiet, I replied. She nodded. I didn't realize how much you built without us. That sentence surprised me, because it was honest. You were busy building too, I said. She shook her head slightly. It's different. We sat in silence for a moment, and then she said something I didn't expect. Dad respects visibility. I raised an eyebrow. He always has, she continued. Titles, recognition, public validation. It makes him feel secure. And teaching didn't. She hesitated. It wasn't loud. There it was, not valuable, not impressive, just not loud. I don't need it to be loud, I said. She looked at me carefully. I think that's what scared him. That made me pause. Why? Because you didn't chase what he chased, and you still ended up on top. On top, I smiled faintly. It was never a competition. Maybe not for you. That shifted something. Because maybe Dad's dismissal hadn't just been about me being small. Maybe it was about him not understanding a different path to meaning. And when he couldn't measure it, he minimized it. Not malicious, just limited. That realization didn't excuse it, but it explained it. A week later, Dad invited me to lunch, just the two of us. No audience, no relatives, just a small restaurant near his office. When I walked in, he stood up quickly. proud, almost nervous. "You look busy these days," he said as we sat down. "I am," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I read the full article," he said. "That caught my attention. The one about your classroom model." "Yes. And it's impressive. Simple, direct. No qualifiers." That mattered more than the national TV segment, because this time he had read the work, not just watched the spotlight. "I didn't understand it before," he admitted. "What you were building." I held his gaze. "And now, I do." The conversation wasn't dramatic. There were no tears. But something fundamental had shifted, not because he saw me on television, because I stopped shrinking to fit his understanding. That was the real revenge. Not humiliation, not public exposure, just growth. Growth that made old judgments look small. When lunch ended, he said something quietly. I shouldn't have said what I said. There it was. No joke, no excuse. No if. "I know," I replied. And I did. But the power dynamic had changed. Not because he apologized, because I no longer needed him to. As I walked back to my car, I realized something important. Recognition is powerful. But self-recognition is permanent. If the broadcast had never happened, if no cameras showed up, if Dad never froze at his phone, would I still be enough? The answer surprised me. Yes, because the award didn't create my worth. It revealed it. And once revealed, when it couldn't be taken back. It's strange how quickly noise fades. One week you're on television. The next week you're back in your classroom wiping marker off a whiteboard. The cameras left. The interview slowed. The news cycle moved on. But something inside me didn't go back to normal. Because this wasn't about attention. It was about alignment. About finally standing in my life without bending. The real test didn't come during applause. It came after. On an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, I was sitting at my desk during lunch answering emails when my phone buzzed. "Dad, a call. A text. And I come by your school today." I stared at the screen. He had never visited my school before. Not once in 10 years. Parent-teacher nights for other relatives' kids. Yes. Corporate award dinners for Alina. Always. But my classroom ever, what for? I typed back. "I'd like to see it. Simple. Direct. No extra words." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to protect that space. That classroom had been mine long before he respected it. But another part of me felt steady. If he was willing to step into my world quietly, I would let him. "After 3:30, I replied. He showed up at 3:27. Of course he did. He was wearing one of his usual pressed shirts, looking slightly out of place among the colorful hallway posters and student artwork. For a moment I saw him the way my students might. Just another adult. Not an authority over me. Not the judge of my choices. Just a man walking into unfamiliar territory. He looked around slowly. The lockers, the bulletin boards, the faded paint. "This is where you've been all these years," he said. "Yes." I unlocked my classroom door and let him step inside. The room was warm with afternoon light. Desks arranged in groups. Student projects lining the walls, quotes written in marker above the board. Growth is louder than doubt. He noticed that one. "You wrote that?" he asked. "My students did." He walked slowly around the room, touching the edge of a desk, reading a poster, studying a science model built from cardboard and glue. "This is organized," he said. I almost laughed. Yes, it is. A few students were still inside finishing assignments. They looked up curiously. "Guys, this is my dad," I said. Luis waved. Dad straightened slightly, suddenly aware he was being observed. "Your daughter," one student said boldly, "is the best teacher in this school." Dad looked at me, then at the student. "Why?" he asked. The girl shrugged, but they landed harder than the applause had. Dad didn't respond immediately. He just nodded slowly. After the last student left, the room fell quiet. "This is different than I imagined," he admitted. "How did you imagine it?" He admitted. "How did you imagine it?" "I don't know. Smaller." There it was again. Small. He had always imagined my world as smaller, less complex, less demanding, less important. "It's not small," I said gently. "No," he agreed. "It's not." And then he asked something unexpected. "Are you happy here?" The question surprised me, because it wasn't about recognition, or television, or status. "Yes," I said honestly, "I am." He studied my face carefully, like he was looking for cracks, for regret, for doubt. He didn't find any. I thought that was success. "And now?" I asked. He glanced around the classroom again. "I see something else." It wasn't a grand confession. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And real is stronger than loud. When he left, he didn't hug me tightly or give a speech. He simply said, "Thank you for showing me." That felt different. Because this time, he wasn't proud of the spotlight. He was respecting the substance. But the real test wasn't him. It was me. Forgiveness sounds simple when you say it quickly, but it's not automatic. It doesn't erase memory. It doesn't rewrite history. It just decides what to carry forward. A few days later, our family had another dinner, small this time, just us. No relatives, no photos, no social media captions. The energy was different, quieter, less performative. At one point, Dad began telling a story about my award to the waiter. But halfway through, he stopped himself. "Actually," he said, turning to me, "you should tell it." It was subtle, but important. He wasn't narrating my life anymore. I was. Elena listened more than she spoke. Mom asked questions about my students. Not about television, about students. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the least impressive person at the table. Not because they had elevated me, because I had stopped lowering myself. After dinner, as we stood outside saying goodbye, Dad looked at me carefully. "You don't need us to validate you anymore," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. "No," I replied calmly. "I don't." He nodded slowly. "That's good. Because here's the truth no one talks about. When you stop needing approval, people feel it, and they adjust. Not because you demand it, because you radiate it." The media attention faded almost completely. Life returned to normal rhythms. Grading papers, parent emails, lesson planning. But something fundamental had shifted. I no longer replayed the text in my head. Just a lowly teacher. It didn't echo the same way. Because it no longer defined the frame, it became a reference point. A reminder of how far I had come internally. One afternoon, a student asked me something unexpected. "Miss Ka, what if someone doesn't believe in you?" I leaned against my desk and thought about it. "You believe in yourself long enough for them to see it," I said. "And if they never do," I smiled gently, "then you build a life that doesn't depend on it." That was the lesson. Not revenge. Not proving someone wrong. Building something solid enough that their opinion becomes background noise. Building something solid enough that their opinion becomes background noise. And here's the part that matters most. If that broadcast had never aired, if no one had sent Dad the clip, if he never froze at his phone in that restaurant, would I still have found this peace? I think so. Because the real turning point wasn't the television. It was the moment I stopped measuring myself with his ruler. The award accelerated the shift. But the shift was already happening. And sometimes, that's the quietest form of revenge. Not hurting them back. Not exposing them publicly. But outgrowing the space they kept you in. Today, when Dad introduces me, he says it differently. "This is my daughter Ka. She's an educator." Not lowly. Just educator. And I don't need the adjectives anymore. Because I know what it means. I know the late nights. The skipped lunches, the notes from students, the lives quietly redirected. And I know something else now, too. Respect that arrives late is still respect. But self-respect that arrives on time, that changes everything. People keep asking me what felt better, winning the award or seeing my father freeze at his phone that night. They expect me to smile when they ask. They expect a dramatic answer. But the truth is, quieter than that, winning didn't feel like revenge. And watching him realize he was wrong didn't feel powerful. What felt powerful was something else entirely. It was a month after the broadcast when everything finally settled. No more interview requests. No more congratulatory emails. No more random calls from distant relatives who suddenly remembered my birthday. Just normal life again. Chalk dust on my sleeves. Coffee gone cold on my desk. Students arguing about group projects. Ordinary. And that's when I understood what really changed. Because ordinary didn't feel small anymore. One afternoon, I stayed late helping Amira rewrite an essay. She was frustrated. "I'm not smart like the other kids," she muttered. I pulled a chair beside her. "Who told you that?" She shrugged. "No one. It just feels true." That sentence hit me harder than it should have. Because I knew that feeling. The quiet belief that maybe you are less. Not because of proof, but because of repetition. I leaned back and looked at her. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "we measure ourselves using someone else's ruler." She frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means we believe what other people value is the only thing that counts." She thought about that, and it's not. "No," I said firmly, "it's not." And as I said it, I realized I wasn't just teaching her. I was confirming something inside myself. For years, I had let my father's definition of success sit above mine. Salary, status, recognition, visibility. Teaching didn't fit that frame. It was steady, quiet, invisible to most. And because it was invisible, it was easy to dismiss. But invisible doesn't mean unimportant. Air is invisible. So is trust. So is impact that takes years to bloom. When I walked home that evening, I passed a small park near my apartment. A father was teaching his daughter how to ride a bike. She wobbled, fell, got back up. He didn't yell, he didn't mock. He held the seat and ran beside her until she found balance. I stopped for a second and watched. That's what teaching feels like. Running beside someone until they don't need you anymore. No spotlight, no applause, just steady presence. And suddenly I felt something shift inside me again. Because that's what I had done for myself too. I had stopped waiting for someone else to hold the seat. I had found my own balance. That weekend, my family invited me to another dinner. Small. Simple. I went. Not because I needed validation, but because I wanted connection. There's a difference. Dad was quieter these days. Less declarative, more observant. At one point during dinner, a family friend asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, Dad spoke. "She designs learning systems that change how students think." I looked at him. That wasn't exaggerated. That wasn't flashy. It was accurate, and it wasn't about television. It was about understanding. Later that night, when everyone else had left the table, Dad stayed behind for a moment. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about why I reacted the way I did." I waited. He wasn't a man who volunteered self-analysis easily. I grew up believing that if something wasn't publicly recognized, it didn't count, he admitted. My father was like that. Titles mattered. Applause mattered. And teaching didn't fit, I said gently. "It felt safe," he replied. "Like you weren't pushing yourself." I smiled faintly. "Safe isn't easy." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." There was no dramatic reconciliation. No emotional collapse. Just two adults recognizing a pattern. That's sometimes more powerful. As I drove home, I thought about something important. He didn't change because I fought him. He changed because I stopped shrinking. Because once I stood fully in my life without apology, it forced a recalibration. Not just in him, in me. Revenge is often imagined as loud, as public, as humiliating. But the most lasting form of revenge is peace. Peace that makes their dismissal irrelevant. Peace that removes the need to prove anything further. Peace that says, I would still be enough, even if you never noticed. And that's the part people don't expect. Because yes, it felt satisfying when his phone buzzed that night. Yes, it felt powerful knowing he saw me through a lens he respected. But that moment would have faded quickly if I still believed I was small. The award wasn't the transformation. It was the mirror. The transformation had already begun. The moment I said, I need you to respect it, and meant it. A few weeks later, I found myself back at the auditorium. Not for an award. For a student showcase. My students were presenting projects they had built over months. Parents filled the seats. Nervous kids stood backstage. I walked across the stage to help adjust a microphone. And I caught my reflection in the darkened glass. For a second, I remembered rehearsal night, the empty chairs, the tightness in my chest, the echo of just a lowly teacher. But this time, there was no tightness, because I wasn't waiting for anyone in those seats anymore. I wasn't scanning for approval. I was scanning for growth. Luis stepped up to present his project. His hands shook slightly. He looked out into the audience, and then he found me. I nodded. He steadied. And he began, clear, unquacking, confident. Rooted in that moment, I understood something fully. Winning wasn't standing under bright lights. Winning was this, watching someone else step into theirs. When the event ended, parents thanked me. Students laughed. The room emptied slowly, and I stayed behind to turn off the lights. Alone in the quiet auditorium, I stood at the edge of the stage. I whispered something softly. Just a teacher. Not lowly, not small. Just. And this time the word felt right, because just can also mean honest, pure, enough. If you're watching this right now, and someone has ever dismissed your path, if they've ever laughed at your dream, if they've ever made you feel like your work is smaller because it isn't loud, remember this. Their recognition is not the finish line. Your integrity is. And integrity doesn't need cameras. It doesn't need headlines. It doesn't need public applause. It needs consistency. It needs courage. It needs you to believe long enough for doubt to lose its volume. My father saw me on national television. But I saw myself long before that. And that made all the difference. Because the night he froze at his phone wasn't the night I became worthy. It was the night he caught up. It happened 3 months later. No cameras, no news vans, no headlines, just folding chairs, a school banner, and the low hum of parents finding their seats. It was career day, the kind of event that used to feel small, forgettable. Except this time, he was there. Dad, sitting in the back row. Not in a suit, not trying to look important, just sitting quietly, watching when the principal told me he had signed in at the front office. I didn't react immediately. Your dad's here, she said with a small smile. My stomach tightened for half a second. Old reflex. Old nerves. But then something steadied. Let him see. I walked into the auditorium carrying a stack of student presentation cards. The stage lights weren't dramatic, just overhead fluorescents. The kind that show everything honestly. The room filled slowly with parents and local volunteers. And there he was, back row, end seat, hands folded. Observing, not commanding the space, not leading the room, just present. 3 months ago, that image would have felt like victory. Now it felt calm. The event began. Students took turns presenting different careers they wanted to explore. Doctor, engineer, graphic designer, chef. When it was Luis's turn, he stepped up to the microphone. I want to be a teacher, he said. The room shifted slightly. Some parents smiled politely, some looked surprised. And then he added, because someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I didn't look at Dad. Not immediately. I kept my eyes on Luis. But I felt it, the weight of those words traveling across the room. Landing. Settling. Luis continued, people think teaching is easy or small, but it's not. It's what makes everything else possible. That sentence, it wasn't rehearsed that way. I hadn't fed him those words. They were his. And as applause filled the room, I finally glanced toward the back. Dad wasn't clapping loudly. He wasn't making a show. He was still, completely still, eyes fixed forward, processing. Because there was no spotlight to blame, no news anchor to validate it, just a student, speaking truth. After the event ended, parents approached me with questions, students ran around excitedly. And Dad waited. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pull me aside dramatically. He waited. When the room thinned out, he walked toward me slowly. That boy, he said quietly, Louis. He meant that. Yes, I replied. He nodded. I've never seen someone speak about a job like that. I smiled faintly. It's not a job. He didn't argue. We walked through the hallway together. He looked at the art on the walls more carefully this time, read the names under each project, paused longer than before. You know, he said after a while, when I was young, no teacher ever talked to me like that. That surprised me. What do you mean? They taught. But they didn't stay. I understood immediately. Teaching can be transactional or transformational. He had experienced the first. I had built the second. I thought success meant climbing, he continued. Higher, louder, bigger. And now? I asked softly. He glanced back toward the auditorium. I see that sometimes success means staying. That was new. He wasn't redefining it for me. He was redefining it for himself. We reached my classroom door. He paused before stepping inside. Can I? He asked. He had never asked permission before. Of course. He walked in slowly, like someone entering a sacred space. The room felt different than the first time he visited. Not because of him, because of me. There was no tension left, no need to prove, just openness. He stood near the whiteboard. Read the quote written across the top. Integrity outlives applause. He looked at me. You wrote that? My students helped. He nodded slowly. I used to think applause was everything. And now, it fades. It does. He sat in one of the student chairs. Actually sat. I don't know why that small action hit me so deeply. Maybe because authority rarely sits in smaller seats. But he did. And for the first time in my life, I saw him not as the judge of my choices. Not as the voice that measured me, but as a man learning something new. Did it hurt? He asked suddenly. What? When I said what I said, he didn't have to repeat it. I knew the words. Just a lowly teacher. Yes, I answered honestly. He nodded. I thought pushing you would make you stronger. I considered that. Pushing isn't the same as dismissing, I said gently. That landed. He didn't defend himself. He didn't reframe it. He just absorbed it. I'm still learning, he admitted. And that might have been the most powerful sentence he had ever said to me. Because it wasn't about pride. It wasn't about reputation. It was about growth. And growth requires humility. Something applause can't teach. Something applause can't teach. Before he left, he turned back once more. I'm glad you didn't change, he said. I tilted my head slightly. I did change. He smiled faintly. No, you grew, but you didn't become louder to be heard. That stayed with me. Because he was right. I didn't win by becoming what he valued. I won by remaining rooted in what I valued. That evening, as I locked up the classroom, I felt something settle completely. Not tension, not triumph. The cycle had shifted, not because I embarrassed him, not because I proved him wrong publicly, but because I held my ground long enough for him to step onto it. That's a different kind of power. A week later, something unexpected happened. Dad asked if he could sponsor a classroom project, not publicly. Not with his name attached. Quietly. "Whatever you need," he said. It wasn't money that moved me. It was intention. Because this wasn't about image. It was about participation. He wasn't just acknowledging my work. He was investing in it. And that's when I realized something profound. The real revenge wasn't exposing him. It was transforming the story from dismissal to understanding, from pride based on spotlight to pride based on substance, from measuring worth loudly to honoring it quietly. And the most surprising part, it didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like healing. Not dramatic healing, not cinematic, just steady, like chalk dust settling after the lesson ends. And if you're still watching this, if you've ever been underestimated, laughed at, reduced to something small, understand this. The goal is not to make them freeze at a screen. The goal is to build something so solid that when they finally look, they're already standing tall. Not because they lifted you, because you never bowed. And sometimes, the most powerful moment isn't when they see you on national television. It's when they sit quietly in the back row and finally understand. There's a word that follows people around quietly. It's small, only 4 letters. But it shrinks rooms. It lowers ceilings. It makes dreams feel unreasonable. Just. Just a teacher. Just a receptionist. Just a stay-at-home mom. Just an assistant. Just a stay-at-home mom. Just an assistant. Just an artist. Just a kid from a small town. I didn't realize how dangerous that word was until it almost defined me. Because when someone says, just, what they really mean is, not impressive enough, not loud enough, not worthy enough. And the most dangerous part, you start believing it. You start introducing yourself smaller, explaining your work defensively, laughing before they can. I did that for years. I would say, I just teach middle school, like I needed to soften it before someone else did. I would downplay long nights, downplay impact, downplay purpose, because I didn't want to seem dramatic about something others treated as ordinary. But here's what I learned. Ordinary work, done with integrity, becomes extraordinary over time. You just don't see it immediately, and neither do they. The night my father froze at his phone wasn't the real turning point. The real turning point was earlier. It was the moment I closed the group chat and decided not to shrink. It was the moment I walked onto that stage without scanning the audience for approval. It was the moment I said calmly, "It mattered before cameras." That's when everything shifted, not externally, internally. Because once you stop needing someone to clap for you, you become impossible to silence. A few weeks ago, one of my students stayed after class. He was quiet, uncertain. "Miss Ka," he said slowly, "my uncle says teachers don't make real money. He says I should pick something better." I smiled gently. "Do you want to be a teacher?" He nodded. "Then you already picked something better." He nodded. "Then you already picked something better." He frowned slightly, "But what if people laugh?" I leaned back in my chair. "Let them." He blinked. "That's it. That's it. That's it." Because laughter fades. Opinion shifts. Respect changes direction. But regret stays. And I would rather live with criticism. The truth is, my father didn't wake up one day and decide to disrespect teaching. He inherited a definition of success, one built on visibility, titles, noise, and he passed it down without questioning it. Until I forced the question. Not by fighting him, but by refusing to accept it. That's the part people miss about revenge. The kind that actually transforms something isn't loud. It's disciplined. It's consistent. It's quiet confidence repeated daily until doubt loses credibility. When I look back now, I don't feel anger about the text anymore, just a lowly teacher. I feel gratitude. Because that sentence exposed something. It showed me exactly where I was still measuring myself by someone else's standards. By someone else's standards. And once exposed, I could remove it. Sometimes pain is a spotlight. Not to shame you, but to show you what needs redefining. A few days ago, I found that original message in the group chat. I didn't delete it. I didn't react to it. I just looked at it calmly, and for the first time, it didn't sting. It looked small. The words hadn't changed. I had. That's growth. Not rewriting the past, outgrowing it. My father doesn't introduce me as just anything anymore. He doesn't overcompensate either. He says, "This is my daughter. She's an educator." And that's enough. Because now when he says it, it doesn't feel like performance. It feels like understanding. But here's the important part. Even if he never changed, even if he never apologized, even if he never showed up in that back row, I would still be enough. Because self-worth built on external applause will always collapse when the room goes quiet. And rooms always go quiet eventually. That's why you have to build something sturdier. Something internal. Something that doesn't flicker when opinions do. Winning the award felt good. Seeing the broadcast felt surreal. Watching him freeze at his phone felt satisfying for about 5 minutes. But what lasts? Peace. Peace when you walk into your own life without apology. Peace when someone calls your path small and it no longer echoes. Peace when you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And if you're watching this right now, if someone in your life has ever reduced you with that word just, pause. Ask yourself one question. Who decided that scale equals value? Who decided loud equals important? Who decided that visible equals worthy? Because those definitions were written by someone, and they can be rewritten. You don't need national television to validate your path. You don't need applause to confirm your impact. You don't need someone who once dismissed you to freeze in public embarrassment. That moment might feel good. But it's temporary. What's permanent? Integrity, consistency, the quiet courage to keep going when no one is watching. And maybe one day, they will look up from their dinner tables. Maybe they will freeze at a screen. Maybe they will finally say, "What is this?" And if that moment comes, smile. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you never stopped proving yourself right. The real power isn't in making them regret their words. It's in reaching a place where those words no longer define your ceiling. I am a teacher, not just. Not lowly, not small. I build minds. I rebuild confidence. I stay when it's easier to leave. And if that doesn't impress the loudest people in the room, that's fine, because I no longer measure myself by noise. So if you've ever been called just anything, remember this. They are speaking from their vocabulary, not your potential. And your potential does not shrink because someone lacks imagination. Keep building, keep choosing meaning, keep showing up, and one day, whether or not cameras arrive, you will look around your life and realize something powerful. You didn't need them to clap. You needed yourself to stand. And once you do, the word just disappears. There's something no one tells you about proving people wrong. It doesn't end the story. It begins a different one. After the award, after the broadcast, after the apologies, life didn't become louder. It became clearer, and clarity changes the way you move. As 6 months passed, the headlines were gone. The social media tags stopped. Even the framed certificate on my wall started to feel like background decoration. But the impact, that stayed one afternoon. I received an envelope in the mail. No return address I recognized, just my name written carefully across the front. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was from a former student, one I hadn't heard from in years. "I saw you on TV," it began. I wasn't surprised. That line made me smile. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm in college now. I'm studying education. Because of you." I sat down slowly. The room suddenly very quiet. "I remember when you stayed after school to help me with reading. You said I wasn't behind. I was building at my own pace. No one had ever said that before." My chest tightened. Not from sadness. From weight. The good kind. You probably don't remember every small moment, but I do. That sentence stayed with me for days, because that's the truth about impact. You don't always see where it lands, you just keep planting. And sometimes, years later, something grows. That evening, I brought the letter to dinner at my parents' house. Not for validation, just to share. Dad read it quietly. Twice. He didn't speak immediately. He handed it back carefully like it was fragile. I didn't understand this part of your work, he admitted. The long-term part. Most people don't, I replied gently. He leaned back in his chair. When I was working, he said slowly, success was quarterly. Numbers, reports, promotions. You either hit the target or you didn't. And teaching? I asked. He looked at the letter again. This is different. Yes, it is. Because teaching isn't measured in quarters. It's measured in years, sometimes decades, and by then, it's already shaped lives quietly. I'm proud of you, he said again. But this time, it didn't sound like pride borrowed from a news segment. It sounded earned, understood. That night, something else shifted. Not in him. For the first time, we weren't discussing whether my career was impressive. We were discussing its meaning, and meaning lasts longer than impression. A few weeks later, Dad did something unexpected. He asked if he could speak at Career Day. I almost laughed when he said it. You? I asked, teasing slightly. Yes, he said. But not about finance. That caught my attention, because this was the same man who once laughed at my invitation. And now he wanted to stand in front of students and talk about redefining success. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Career Day arrived. This time, he didn't sit in the back. He stood at the front, not as an authority over me, not as a critic, but as someone who had learned something. He looked at the students and said, "When my daughter told me she wanted to be a teacher, I thought she was choosing small." The room went quiet. I stood near the wall, arms crossed, listening. I was wrong, he continued, because I was measuring her with the wrong ruler. That sentence hung in the air. Students watched him carefully. I thought success meant being seen, he said, but sometimes success means seeing others. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pride, gratitude. Because growth like that isn't easy. It requires humility. After his talk, a student approached him. My parents think art is a waste of time, she said quietly. Dad paused, and then he said something I never thought I'd hear from him. Build it well enough that they can't ignore it. I smiled. Because that sentence carried everything. Not revenge, not defiance. Just excellence. Consistent enough to outlast doubt. Later that afternoon, as we walked down the hallway together, he nudged me lightly. You've influenced me more than I influenced you, he admitted. I shook my head. No, I said. You influenced me too. How? You showed me exactly what not to measure myself by. He laughed softly. Fair enough. Growth doesn't erase the past. It reframes it. And sometimes the people who misunderstand you become part of the lesson that strengthens you. Months turned into a year. Life settled into rhythm again. But there was one more moment that sealed everything. One evening, while cleaning out old storage boxes, Mom found a childhood drawing of mine. Stick figures. A classroom. A chalkboard with messy letters. At the top, written in uneven handwriting, "When I grow up, I will be a teacher." She brought it to me quietly. You were always this, she said. Always, not eventually. Not because of TV, always. And I realized something powerful. No one can belittle what is rooted. You can dismiss it, laugh at it, ignore it. But if it's rooted deep enough, it survives. And teaching had always been rooted in me. The award didn't plant it. The apology didn't validate it. The broadcast didn't create it. It was there at 13, at 19, at 25, at 31. And it will be there at 60. That's legacy, not the certificate, not the segment. The consistency. Years from now, my father won't be remembered for the text he sent. He'll be remembered for the moment he changed. For standing in front of students and admitting he measured success wrong. for sitting in the back row and finally understanding, and I won't be remembered for national television. I'll be remembered by students who felt seen, and that's enough. If you've ever been called just something, know this. Your work is not small because someone lacks imagination. Your path is not weak because someone prefers noise. Your impact is not invisible just because it isn't trending. Build it anyway. Choose it anyway. Stay with it anyway. Stay with it anyway. Because one day, someone will sit in a back row, or freeze at a screen, or read a letter written years later, and they'll understand what they couldn't see before. And by then, you won't need it. You'll already know. There's one last thing I need to tell you. It didn't happen on stage. It didn't happen on television. It didn't happen on television. It didn't even happen in a classroom. It happened on a random Tuesday night. No cameras, no speeches, no dramatic confrontation, just me. Alone. Again. A year had passed since the award. Life was steady. Normal. Beautifully ordinary. The certificate still hung on the wall, but I barely noticed it anymore. The news clip had long been buried under newer stories. Even the congratulations had faded into memory. But something else had grown in its place. Peace. That Tuesday night, I was grading essays at my kitchen table. The same table where I had read the email months ago. The same table where I had stared at my phone after reading. Just a lowly teacher. Funny how life circles back to the same places. Funny how life circles back to the same places. My phone buzzed. Not a dramatic call. Not urgent. Just a simple message from Dad. Proud of you today. No link, no headline, no broadcast. Just that. I stared at the message for a long time. Because this time, nothing public had happened. No spotlight, no article, just an ordinary school day. I thought about what had happened earlier. Louise had gotten into college. Amira had presented her first debate speech confidently. One of my students had stayed after class just to say, "You make school feel safe." Small moments. Invisible moments. Moments that would never trend. And yet Dad had written, "Proud of you today," because he understood me. And something inside me finally exhaled fully. Not because I needed the text, but because it wasn't attached to noise. It was attached to meaning. And that's when I realized something that took me years to learn. The applause was never the point. The point was alignment. Alignment between who I am and what I do. Alignment between my values and my choices. Alignment between my worth and my work. For years, I thought revenge would feel explosive, like fireworks. Like fireworks. Like a dramatic, "I told you so." Like watching someone regret their words publicly. And yes, there was satisfaction in that moment at the restaurant. Yes, there was power in seeing the shift. But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was quieter. It was walking into my life without explaining it. It was hearing the word teacher and feeling pride instead of defense. It was watching my father evolve without forcing him to. It was forgiving without forgetting. It was remembering without shrinking. That's maturity. That's maturity. That's strength. That's peace. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a teachers' conference, not nationally, just locally. Small stage. And someone in the audience asked me a question that caught me off guard. What would you say to someone whose family doesn't respect their career? The room went quiet. I paused. Because I knew that question intimately, I would say, I began slowly. Build your life strong enough that their respect becomes a bonus, not a requirement. The room stayed silent, listening. You don't need their applause to begin, I continued. You only need your conviction. I saw a few heads nod, and I realized something. This story was never just about me and my father. It's about anyone who has ever been reduced by that word. Just a nurse. Just a writer. Just a builder. Just a teacher. The world loves volume. It loves viral. But some of the most important work happens quietly. And quiet work often gets mistaken for small work. That's the lie. A week after the conference, I found myself back at the park near my apartment, the one where I once watched the father teaching his daughter to ride a bike. This time the girl was riding alone, confident, balanced. The father stood back, watching with a smile. He wasn't holding the seat anymore. He wasn't running beside her. He was simply there. And that's when it hit me. That's teaching. That's growth. That's parenting, too. Eventually, you let go. You step back. You watch. And if you've done it right, they ride on their own. My father didn't need to hold my seat anymore. And I didn't need him to. We weren't locked in that old dynamic. We weren't replaying that old script. We had rewritten it. Not perfectly, but honestly. One night at dinner, he looked at me and said something simple. "You're not just anything." He didn't say it dramatically. He didn't over-explain. He just corrected the old language. And I smiled. Because the truth is, I stopped being just anything the moment I decided to stop accepting it. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, I want you to hear this clearly. The night he froze at his phone wasn't the moment I won. The night I went to bed peacefully without answering his calls was closer. The moment I said it mattered before cameras was closer. The day I stood in my classroom and realized I didn't need empty chairs filled to feel proud, that was closer. Winning isn't about making someone regret underestimating you. Winning is about reaching a place where their underestimation no longer limits you. That's freedom. And freedom is the quietest, strongest form of revenge. So if you're sitting there right now, feeling small because someone laughed at your dream, let them. If they reduce your work to a single word, let them. If they don't show up to your ceremony, go anyway. Build anyway. Stay anyway. Because one day, maybe they'll look up from their dinner table and freeze at a screen. Maybe they'll sit quietly in the back row. Maybe they'll send a simple text that says, "Proud of you today." And when that moment comes, it won't define you, because you will have already defined yourself. I am Ka. I am 31. I am a teacher. Not lowly, taught small, not just. And if this story reminded you of your own strength, if you ever been underestimated and needed to hear that you are not just anything, then stay here. Subscribe, because this is where stories that were once dismissed find their voice. And sometimes, the quietest voices echo the longest.